Today I'm going to show you how to get photos of wine glass splash photography, a little bit like this. It's a classic and it's been done many times before, but you're not a true photographer until you've dropped some stuff into a glass full of wine or splashed it around a little bit and got some glass splash photography. That was a mouthful. And before I forget, if you're not already a subscriber, click that subscribe button now and turn on notifications for weekly tutorials in photography. Now for this kind of photography, you will make a bit of a mess. So you need to make sure you're in a room where it doesn't matter if the floor gets wet. I made a lot of mess in my office, but we're lucky that we have tiled floors, so I mopped it up afterwards. But if you have carpet or a table that might soak up the water, do it outside or do it on a table or a surface that doesn't matter. And over a floor that doesn't matter getting wet either, maybe in a garage or something like that. If you are doing it outside, it'll probably be worth doing it at night where you don't have to battle with the ambient light or sunlight. And this is especially so if you're going to try out the last one that I did. That got really messy and it took a while to clear up. So this is the setup. I've got my camera on a tripod and I've got the X1 Godox trigger, and that's going to talk to the AD200. I've got that in a 60x90 softbox. And then obviously I've got my glass on the table. And then I've got the background right behind me here. This is just to cover up the cupboards that I've got in the background because they're quite a dark red color. So that just covers those up and gives me a white background. If you haven't got like a big 5-in-1 reflector, the best thing to use is just a white wall. So find a white wall, and it doesn't actually have to be white. You just find a plain colored wall in your house and just have that in the background and have it as far away from the glass as possible. The beauty with a 5-in-1 reflector is that you've got a lot of different colors in there. I've got green, blue, I've got white, and I've got black. I'm not going to use the silver or gold. They'll be a little bit tacky, but I've got all of those other colors in there and I can use them to have different colored backgrounds. You'll also need a few other accessories. You don't need these, but they do help. And the more you have, the more you can add to your photo. First of all is the second flash. I've got another AD200. That works really well. Then for that flash, it's going to light the background. I've got these gels from Rogue. And what these do, they're basically like little color sheets, and they'll sit on the front of the flash. They're really good, and you've got them in so many different colors. If you've got a white background, you can use these and very quickly change the color of that background. They're well worth getting, and they're quite cheap as well. Then we've got food coloring. Might get a bit messy when we start sloshing water around, but if you've got a plain white background and you've only got water in the glass, it can look quite plain. So by adding different colors, you can add to that photo. So I've got green and I've got red. That's all they had, so that's all I got. Now with this food coloring, you do need a pipette, and this means you can grab a little bit out and just drip it into the water. So you're not adding too much color to that water at any one time. Then we've got plastic ice cubes. These are really good, and it means your ice cubes aren't melting and they're changing the size of them. They always stay exactly the same. And this is a prop that is used time and time again in so many different adverts. They're perfectly clear, whereas normal ice cubes will have bubbles in and imperfections in. So these work really well, and you can get them, again, these are really cheap. As well as that, we've got garnishes. I've got a lemon and a lime, and I'll be slicing them up and putting them on the side of the glass. Obviously I've got the glass and the water. The glass, you just need to polish it, and I've got a little towel that I do polish it with, and that's just to remove any bits of dust and any smudges or finger marks on it, and obviously a jug of water. Now, later on, this is where it'll get really messy. I've got some strawberry milkshake. I just want to see how that milk will look in the shot as well. So I've got an idea, and I want to see if that works. Where you're taking these photographs, you want to make sure that you don't have anything staining, especially with the food dyes. I've got this table from IKEA. This doesn't stain, and I've got a tiled floor. First of all, you want to line the glass up in the shot. I'm going to get it to fill the frame first, and then what I'm going to do is move the camera back as I take more shots and as I start moving on to those dynamic shots. But first of all, we want to get good exposure on that glass. I'm going to use my base flash photography settings, and I talked about those in my basics flash photography tutorial, which is linked up in the corner. So if you haven't seen that yet, go and watch that. But these are basically 1/200th of a second, f8, ISO 100. I'll have the flash on 1/4 power, and then I'll have the flash on manual, and I'll have the camera on manual as well. So I'm in control of absolutely everything. One other good thing to have that I didn't mention in the accessories is a pane of glass. I've got an old piece of glass, which you can see just here, and that's from an old bedside cabinet. If you don't have this, you can maybe take one out of an old picture frame or see if you can find a bit of plexiglass. This works really well, and it's just so you get a reflection on the surface where the glass is sitting. Again, this just adds to the shot and it adds to how it looks. For this setup, I'll use a few small bits of blue tack to stick the glass to the table so it's not moving around. I'll also put a small mark with a pencil right in the middle where I'm going to sit the glass. This is so you can use it as a marker to put the glass back in the same place time and time again, because that glass is going to get covered in water or whatever liquid you have in the glass, so sometimes you'll need to wipe it down and make the glass clean again. I'm going to use the 85mm with the A7R II, but if you only have the kit lens, then get this to the longest focal length. You want your camera to be far away to avoid getting any water on it whatsoever. Also, because of this, a remote trigger comes in handy. I have two, a cabled one and also a remote one, so I'll probably use both throughout the duration of this tutorial. If you don't have any trigger remotes, you can use the self timer, but it will take a while to get your timing dialed in properly. And that's why it's much better to have a wired remote where you can press it and you know it's going to take a photo as soon as you press it. Because we're going to be dropping things in the glass or splashing the water out of the glass, you'll find it's really hard to get that timing right, spot on every single time. I find it quite tricky even with a remote trigger. So it's better to have a remote trigger than have it on the timer. Also, the wider the lens that you use, the bigger the background will have to be. So go long on your focal length. I'm going to start with a static glass and then start making a mess as I go along. So we'll keep the glass in the middle for now. Now use that marker and place it directly over this. Now get your focus and take a shot. So this is where we're going to see what the flash is doing. If it's overexposed, close the aperture down to get that depth of focus deeper. And if it's too dark, increase the flash power. Now in this next series of photos, I've set the flash at different positions so you can see how that light affects the glass and the background. For the first one, it's pointing exactly the same way as the camera, so I just held the softbox above the camera. The next one, I put it at 45 degrees, and the third one, I put it at 90 degrees. After that, I put it at 135 degrees, and then I moved it around directly behind the glass. With the one behind the glass, I had to change the settings. I set the flash down to 1/32nd power. Now I really like it from the 135 degree angle. It puts a line of light from your softbox on both sides of the glass, and that gives nice detail in the glass. Ultimately, it's up to you as to where you put your flash, but do this test and work out which one you prefer. I prefer 135 degrees, but you might prefer 90 degrees. So try it at all of those different angles and maybe move it around a bit, move it up and down, and just work out a position that you really like. Once you've got the flash where you want it, you just want to dial in those settings even further. What I'm going to do is play around with my aperture, and I'm also going to play around probably with my ISO and the flash power. So they're the three settings you want to play around with. You leave your shutter speed where it is, because that basically just controls your ambient light. We don't have any ambient light. I did a test shot earlier and that shot was completely black, so I know there's no ambient light coming in. Next, it's time to dial in the settings to get a good exposure on the glass. I set my shutter speed to 1/200th of a second, the ISO to 200, and then I closed the aperture down to f11. With the flash, I dropped it down to 1/8 power. Now, one thing you've probably noticed is that you can see all of the creases in that 5-in-1 reflector. And that's the only downside to these. Because of the way that they fold up, you will get creases in them. And this is why it's really good to have a plain wall instead of one of these 5-in-1 reflectors. Or even better, if you have a sheet of paper or a sheet of card, that works well as well. So just something that's nice and flat and something that doesn't have any creases in it. So I might change this around now, so I've got this white wall as my background. So now I've changed everything around a little bit. Instead of having that 5-in-1 reflector as the background, giving those creases, I've used the wall. And this is much better because the wall is much flatter and I can get that glass closer to the wall without having any creases or anything in the background, messing up the shot and giving me more things to do in Photoshop. I've now got the camera just out of shot and it's around about 6 foot away from the glass. I'm also recording the back of the camera as well so you can see what's going on the back monitor of the camera. One other thing, I've just switched out from a cable shutter release to a wireless shutter release. And this means I don't have to keep going back close to the camera to take a photograph. So I'm going to stick with this 135-degree angle and play around with that. If it's facing directly at the glass from this point, it will tend to throw some light on the background. So you need to aim it more towards the camera than towards the glass. This will avoid any spill light from hitting that background. So with this shot, the softbox was facing the camera, and as you can see, I've eliminated most of that spill light from the background. Now if you look at them side by side, you can see when you aim the flash directly at the glass, like the shot on the left, it really does spill some light onto that background and it doesn't look great. So rotate the flash until there aren't any blatant lines on that background. Now if you only have one flash, you might want to aim on getting a bit on the background and a bit on the glass. This is where having that flash behind the glass and at 90 degrees would work quite well. Alternatively, you can light just the glass and have a completely black background. If you do this, make sure you've got as much distance as possible between the background and your glass. And also to emphasize that black background, if you have a 5-in-1 reflector, make sure you have the black surface and hang that up behind the shot. Now, if you only have one flash and you want to skip this section on 2 flashes, go to this time code now. Although in it, I do talk about how to set up 2 flashes, so it might be worth watching to learn about how to do that, and you never know, you might end up ordering a second flash online. And also, it's not like we've got anything to do at the moment while we're in lockdown, so you might as well watch the whole thing. So just dial in those settings until you get good light on your glass and the background doesn't have any spill light on it. Once you have got your glass lit how you want it, you want to set up your second flash. I've got a second AD200 and I'm going to use the normal Fresnel light head on this and I'm going to light that background. I'm going to aim it up slightly, around about 45 degrees, so it lights the background evenly. I've got it in the manual setting and I've put it on 1/4 power. And this is always my starting point. So I'll take a shot and see how it comes out. With this setting, at 1/4 power, it really does overpower the shot. Because that's overexposed, what I'll do is drop that power in that flash until I find a setting that I like. And that's the great thing with having it in manual mode. You can drop the power of each flash. So I've got group A on this one main flash in the softbox, and I've set this other flash on the floor to group B. So I can control them both independently. This is now where I'm going to use the gels on this flash. I've got blue, green, red, yellow, and pink. The one that I really prefer is the blue color. This is really striking and it is really nice color and it really pops out. When you put these darker colors on, what you will find is it'll take a little bit of that flash power away. So you might have to dial in that setting once again. But again, just go through those flash settings. If it looks too dark, add a bit of power to that one flash. If it's too bright, take it away. Basically, what you want to do is make your glass pop out of the shot and not have the background kind of take over that whole shot. If those strips down the side of the glass are getting overpowered by the blue light, then you need to drop the power of that flash on the floor. It's just a case of trial and error really, until you find something that you like. This is why I split it up as well into working out the diffused flash first and then the background second. If you set them both up at the same time, you might get confused as to which one you need to change. So set the diffused one first, get that into the position that you want, and then set the floor one up next. And then just change the power of that blue light until you get it where you want. So now I've got good light on the glass and the background is a nice color. It's lit by this flash on the floor. I actually nearly killed one of my AD200s when I was doing this earlier. So what I've done is grabbed one of my old Yongnuos and I've put it in a plastic bag. I've just set it to slave mode, so when the main flash fires, this flash fires as well. And just as a reminder, I've got this floor flash on 1/16 power, and I've got my main softbox light at 1/8 power. Next, you want to put some water in the glass and then start dropping things into the glass. I started off with ice cubes and then I tried some chunks of lemon. You need to really work on your timing, so you're going to drop that ice cube and then you're going to fire as that ice cube hits the water. Sometimes the ice cube will hit the edge of the glass and sometimes it'll miss completely. I've had both of these happen. And also you probably want to get quite a strong wine glass, especially when you're dropping from quite a height, because you don't want that glass to break. If it does break, be very careful when you're clearing it up. Now with a wine glass, because the entrance is a lot narrower than the base, what I found is the splash tended to go up and towards each other. I think if you had a martini glass, that would work much better with this, because it's one of those upside down triangular glasses. This will mean that the splash will come out. With any of these things, it's a case of trial and error. You've got to get your timing right, and you've got to get lucky with the way that the lemon or the ice cubes hit the water and the way that it splashes up. What you'll find is you'll drop it once and it'll splash one way, and you'll drop it from exactly the same height, but it'll splash another way. So you've just got to get the numbers in until you get a shot that you like. Now comes the messy bit. If you have that second flash on the floor, you really have to make sure it's in a bag. I put mine in an oversized Ziploc bag and made sure none of the plastic was touching the flash itself, just in case it got a little bit too hot for the plastic bag. So what I did was fill the glass up with water and then flicked it away from me. As I flicked it, I then started triggering my camera to take a photo of that water sloshing out. Now just make sure there's nothing that can get damaged where that water is going. You'll be surprised at how far it goes, and if it hits the table, you'll be surprised at how far it splashes out. And if you're not sure about getting that place wet, do it outside or in the garden at night, or maybe in a garage over a concrete floor. Again, you just need to do it in a place where you don't mind it getting wet. Again, with this, it's all about getting the timing right, with the flick of the glass and the hitting the shutter button. It might be worth putting it in a high-speed drive mode at this point, so it takes a few shots in quick succession. The only downside to this is if you have a slow camera or a flash with just AA batteries in it. This will really drain the flash power quickly. In my Yongnuo that I had in that bag on the floor, I went through about 8 batteries in quite a short amount of time. Now the AD200 really does keep up with this, and I could have it in high-speed drive mode on my A7 III. There's nothing worse than having everything set up and everything ready to go and your flash batteries run out. So if you can afford it, get some flashes with those lithium-ion batteries in it, because they last so much longer. Now with this one, make sure you're flicking the water perpendicular to the way that your camera is pointing, so at 90 degrees. This means that that water splash will be all in focus. If you do it a little bit towards the camera or a little bit away from the camera, then what you'll find is it'll go out of focus. When you do get a good one, make note of where the glass is in the frame, and then take a shot of the glass again, but holding it at the top of the glass. This will give you a clean stem to that glass. And then what we're going to do a little bit later on is blend those two shots together and Photoshop out your arm, so it's as if the glass is floating in midair. So just go through your shot and make sure you note exactly where that glass is in the frame, and then hold it at the top of the glass and hold it at the right angle. What I'll tend to do is take a series of shots moving the glass through different angles until I get a few good ones. Now with the focus modes, you can either have it in wide, or one I like to have it is in that flexible spot. What I'll do is, because I've got that mark on the table, I'll put it on the table, I'll have the spot on there, and I'll focus to that point. I'll have it on back button focusing so I know that focus will never change. And because I've got that mark on the table, as long as I'm lining the glass up with that mark, I know the glass will always be in focus. The reasoning behind this is so when we blend those two shots together, the glass is in exactly the same place and the focus is in exactly the same place as well. So you won't get any focus breathing and everything will be the same size in the frame, so it'll be easier to blend the two shots together. After this, I added some food coloring to the water in the glass. And this is where it gets really messy. Luckily, my table isn't porous and it hasn't stained it. But if you do spill any of this water with this food coloring in it, make sure you clean it up really quickly and make sure you use a really dark towel. So the towel doesn't get stained, the table doesn't get stained, and you don't get into trouble. But if you're not sure, don't do it. Or if you're not sure, go and do it outside like I've already mentioned. With the food coloring, it worked quite well. I did use the red food coloring, so it looks a little bit like a cup of blood. Again, I took one where I was holding the glass at the stem, and then I made a note of where that glass was in the good shot, and then I held the glass at the top and took some clean shots of that stem. Now this last one I don't advise, but I wanted to see what would happen and how it would pick up the colour of the milky liquid. So I used strawberry milkshake and it made such a mess. And luckily I cleared it up before my wife saw the mess, otherwise I'd have been in big trouble. So for those of you who are daring enough to try this last one, fill the glass up as normal, get your focus on the glass, and then flick it to the side as before. Keep taking shots and refilling the glass until you get some good ones. I had to do it 2 or 3 times before I got some that I liked. Then review your images and see where the glass is sitting in the frame. As a tip, it's worth checking to see if your shots are in focus by using that magnify tool. You can see here if I zoom in to this big stream of milkshake, I've got really good focus and a lot of it is in focus. And that's at f16, so your depth of focus is quite good and it's quite deep. Now if you're having trouble lining up the stem shot with the flick shot, try this technique. Review the shot you like and then work out where the base of the stem is. Then move that focusing square to that point. Then when you take the second shot, which is the stem shot, you can use the focusing square to line up the stem of the glass and get it in around about the right point. Then take a series of stem shots with that glass at slightly different angles, so you've got a lot to choose from. You also want to take some with liquid in the glass and without liquid as well, so you've got different options when editing. Now I used a monitor so I could see exactly what was going on the back of the camera, but if you don't have this, you need someone to help you, or maybe if you download and use the app from the camera brand that you use. This should show you what's going on the back of the camera. That is, unless your camera has a flippy screen and you can see that monitor on the back of the camera from being in front of the camera. But this way, you'll be able to line it up properly and get the 2 shots in almost exactly the right place to make that editing process a lot easier. Now I've split the video into 2 sections this week, so if you enjoyed this one and want to see how I edit these shots together, click on this next video here. And if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe for weekly tutorials in photography. Now go and watch that editing video.